Give it a round of applause to Adelaide. And as well, we are recording for today. It will be only for our purposes only. If you do not want to be seen, if you do not want your camera to be on or anything else, please go ahead and make sure you have muted yourself. And you are welcome if you feel incredibly more comfortable, you can turn your camera off.
All right, thank you, Nico, for hosting this event. As I've said before, my name is Adelaide Apostol, and I'm part of the Capo Capitan program. I'm an intern. And for this internship program, we were tasked to find an aspect of Filipino culture that we were interested in and to tie that into mental health issues within our community. So my presentation is going to be focused on colonial mentality and how that continues to impact Filipino Americans in our community today. Let me go to the next slide. So first, we need to establish what exactly is colonial mentality. E.J.R. David and his co-writer Okazaki defined colonial mentality essentially as the ethnic and cultural inferiority, which takes form in valuing the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of the dominant colonizing culture over one's indigenous culture. That's a lot of words, so I'm going to rephrase it. And essentially, what David and Okazaki are trying to say is that colonial mentality is this internalized attitude of ethnic or cultural inferiority felt by people as a result of colonization. So if an individual is being colonized by another group, they tend to have this belief that the cultural values of the colonizer are inherently superior to one's own. It's really important to note that colonial mentality isn't just present within the Philippine X community, it can also be present in other communities that have experienced colonialism. But the main question that I'm going to target in this presentation is, where does colonial mentality fit in with Philippine X folks? And that is going to be answered in our next slide. It fits in within the years 1521 to 1898. And that was a time when Spain colonized the Philippines. So we were colonized for 333 years. So a little crash course on the Spanish colonization of the Philippines. The Spanish colonial period of the Philippines began when the explorer Ferdinand Magellan came to the islands in 1521, and he claimed the lands of the Philippines as a colony for the Spanish Empire under King Philip, who was the present king at that time. And this period, again, as I stated, lasted for 333 years. That's a lot of time, until the Philippine Revolution in 1898, which was led by Andres Bonifacio and his organization known as Katipunan. In fact, we actually just celebrated Bonifacio Day on November 30th on Monday. And it's really important to note that during these 333 years, a lot of the indigenous natives within the Philippines undergo a lot of oppression, and a lot of that could be because of Spanish government and Spanish laws also having a strong tie to the Roman Catholic faith, which was highly important in Spanish culture during that time. So what happened was indigenous natives within the Philippines, we didn't worship the Catholic faith at first. We worshiped gods and goddesses known as diwatas, and they tended to represent events in nature. So we tended to connect those natural events in the Philippines to diwatas and gods. So this obviously made indigenous natives stand out, and it led to a lot of oppression. I mean, the indigenous natives weren't even allowed to call themselves Filipinos. Our indigenous natives were known as Indios during that time. In fact, the only people who were allowed to call themselves Filipinos were, that term was reserved for Spaniards born in the Philippines. So as you can see, a lot of the indigenous natives within the Philippines were subjects of exploitation and abuse for 333 years. So as you can see, indigenous natives were directly affected by the Spanish colonization. And there were also a few years of American imperialism and Japanese control in World War II, where we began to also suffer from their control. Now here's the important part. I'm going to try to tie in how that historical context is still relevant today. So because of Spanish colonialization and American imperialism and the control of the Japanese and the Philippines in World War II, Filipinos started to adopt this attitude known as colonial mentality. And it's really important to know that there are two ways colonial mentality manifests itself. One is covertly, and the second, overtly. So a covert manifestation could be seen through internalized inferiority and cultural shame and embarrassment for being Filipino. Now, from the first sound of it, it may seem like the same, but they're actually slightly different, but they both go hand in hand. So on one hand, cultural shame and embarrassment for being Filipino is pretty self-explanatory. You're not really proud of your identity, and internalized inferiority is slightly the same thing, but with internalized inferiority, you believe that not only are you embarrassed about your Filipino identity, but you hold the Filipino identity in a low regard compared to other cultures, such as American or Western culture. The second way, which I feel like a lot of like the Filipino community can relate to, is through overt manifestation. So colonial mentality can manifest itself in external experiences within the Filipino American community. I don't know if you guys noticed, but within my pictures here, I have a picture of the Balikbayan box. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but essentially the Balikbayan box, or padala in Tagalog, was or is a tradition in Filipino American families or Filipino families who are abroad. And usually what they do is they give away products found within the countries that they immigrated from back to the motherland in the Philippines as like treats or gifts to family members. And it's really surprising, but I found out that that could also be an overt manifestation of colonial mentality, because that implies that there's this hierarchical attitude we see in American products or foreign products. We place importance in products such as Spam. I don't know if you guys have had that experience, but I remember growing up when my parents were about to send a box home in the Philippines. A lot of the things within that box, they didn't really have emotional significance, right? If I really wanted to connect with my cousins back at home, I would like give a card or a letter. But instead, they were mostly American commodities like Spam or Hershey's or Baby Ruth's or Tootsie Rolls. And I'm saying all these American brands because the brands was really significant in my family. Because again, that's one of the ways that colonial mentality can externally manifest itself. It implies that like we place this attitude that American products should be held in high regard compared to Filipino products. So another way that overt manifestation of colonial mentality can occur within the Filipino American community is poor body image. So we tend to look at the features that we were born with, right? Our brown skin, our black hair, our flat noses. We view them as not valuable, not worthy, and instead we see Eurocentric features as more important. And I'm going to go further in depth of that in my other slides. So this here, I felt like this infographic was really helpful. This was also published by E.J.R. David. He's really important in the findings of colonial mentality. And I want to direct your attention here where it says 5 signs of colonial mentality, because those were exactly what E.J.R. David found, what I described. So according to what he created as the colonial mentality scale, there are at least 5 indicators of colonial mentality among Filipinos. So as I've said before, number 1 talks about feelings of inferiority for being Filipino, the fact that you hold your Filipino identity in a lower regard compared to other cultural identities or other culture is one way that colonial mentality can manifest itself. Feeling ashamed and embarrassed for being Filipino is another covert manifestation of colonial mentality. And the third, I didn't go over this, but this one is, it says discriminating against less westernized Filipinos, those who are fresh off the boat, or FOBs. So that basically means that within Filipino American communities, we could also be hostile towards Filipinos who have recently immigrated. I remember growing up, I identify as a 1.5 generation immigrant. I came here at the same time as my parents, and I came at the age of 4 to the US. And I also came with a strong Filipino accent. And I remember my cousins joking about my accent and how that just made it even more obvious that, like, I wasn't assimilated to American culture yet. And there's also the experience of the lunchbox moment. This isn't just exclusive to Filipino Americans, but I feel like it could be felt towards a lot of Asian Americans as well. So the lunchbox moment is basically this phenomenon where a lot of Asian American kids, they bring in cuisines from their home for lunch, and they stick out like a sore thumb because of the food that they bring. It's not Americanized, like Lunchables or a sandwich. And in doing so, it kind of makes like a lot of Asian Americans, this was like their defining moment of rejecting their own identity. And that can be found in Filipino Americans too. So the fourth one says desiring lighter skin or other European physical traits, which I'll go into depth in the next slides, and denying, tolerating, or minimizing the historical and modern day oppression of Filipinos. This is also called colonial debt, which I will also talk about in the next few slides. So colonial mentality versus colonial debt. What's the difference and how do they go hand in hand, and how is the Navy involved, and how are Filipino nurses in America involved? So again, I want to emphasize that there's a difference between colonial mentality and colonial debt. Colonial mentality, again, is the ethnic and cultural inferiority, which takes form in valuing the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of the dominant colonizing culture over one's indigenous culture. So remember, it's holding your own culture in low regard compared to Western cultures, which you would hold in high regard. Colonial debt is slightly different. Colonial debt also holds Western cultures in a very high regard, but there's also this perception that the colonizer or Western countries, for instance, they're not only perceived as having the superior culture, they're not only perceived as the superior country or civilization, but they're also seen as well-intentioned, civilizing, liberating, or noble heroes, as E.J.R. David and Okazaki says. And what that means is that a lot of people who have been colonized by Western cultures, they tend to adopt this attitude that it's actually better off that they were colonized rather than, I guess, left alone and not colonized. And so this leads to a lot of people who have been subjected to colonialism to forgive the historic oppression or even deny the historic oppression that they had to face for being under colonization. And now you're probably wondering, how do Filipino nurses and Filipino people in Navy get involved in that? Well, actually, as I found out, with the Navy, a lot of US military actions, particularly in the year 1898, during the Philippine-American War had a lot to do with migration patterns with early Filipino Americans. And most of the time, they also emphasized assimilation and how assimilation tended to have benefits, so national status and military benefits, which in doing so influenced a lot of people to, or a lot of Filipino Americans to join the Navy. The same thing happened with Filipino nurses. So in the US set it up nursing schools in the Philippines that taught American curriculums in an effort to civilize the Philippines. And because of that, a lot of Filipino workers who decided to migrate to America tended to go for these two careers. They tended to go for nursing or the Navy. So if you've ever wondered why there's so many Filipino nurses in the US in the first place, is because of that, because of US influence and US programs that set up nursing schools in the Philippines that were an attempt to civilize the Philippines. And that could be an example of colonial debt as well. But colonial debt isn't just seen in a historical context, it can also be seen within an internal context, within family dynamics. And that brings me to my next slide. So this is a really significant quote for me, and I felt like it connected with what I was trying to say with colonial debt. A little bit about the person who created this quote, Dr. Rosales Meza. She has a PhD in counseling psychology, and she is also a first generation child of immigrants. She's had experience with growing up with poverty, and she focuses her work in helping Black, Indigenous, and women and femmes of color. And here she says, feeling like you always have to be doing something is a colonial trauma response. Allow yourself to feel worthy of rest. Now, what exactly does that mean? So within a lot of Filipino families, there's always been this standard of productivity. There's always been this standard that we have to work hard, or at least we have to be in a state of constant work in order to be of value, in order to be deemed worthy. And a lot of the times, that experience is seen with the way Filipinos regard education, right? In our community, education is a really big and important thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, what makes it a lot more toxic is when we make education a means to a valued end. It's no longer something where we can take genuine interest in, or we can take genuine pleasure in learning. It's more of a stepping stone in order to get the highest grades, in order to get the best job, in order to be at the top of your class. It's seen as an outlet to be deemed as worthy, to be deemed as valuable in the eyes of our community. And that's not only seen in Filipinx youth as well. It could also be seen in our parents, in our older manongs and manangs in our community, because a lot of first generation immigrants also had that mentality where they felt like they had a debt to resettle, and the only way to do that was to work hard and get into stable jobs. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with providing for your families, but I think one of the best ways you can decolonize yourself from colonial mentality is to allow yourself to rest and allow yourself to feel worthy of rest. So as I've said, I was going to go back to colonial mentality and its impact on beauty standards. So as I've said previously, colonial mentality has a very strong hold in the way Filipinx folks regard their body and regard their features. So that comes with us rejecting the features that we were born with and accepting without criticism a lot of Eurocentric features. I don't know if you guys have had any moments, but I remember growing up, my mom would tell me to stay in the shade or to constantly wear sunscreen because like she was afraid of me getting dark. Or even in particular, she would told me to practice pinching my nose so that it could be slim. And that's also a manifestation of colonial mentality, right? Because it shows that, or it implies that we're rejecting the features that we have, the Filipino features that we have. And it's showing that we need to reach this Western beauty standard rather than a Filipino beauty standard. There's also rampant colorism within the Philippines and within Filipino American communities, right? You can see that in Filipino media, where they tend to shed light on mestizo or mestiza folks, right? I see someone shaking their head vigorously at that, right? We tend to idolize people who come from mixed lineage, right? I guess I'll just name drop a few. No shame in them. They're really great actors and actresses. And Curtis, right? Even Pia Wurchbach, Miss Catriona Gray, right? We see this in Miss Universe, right? And beauty pageants where, yes, we're proud of them representing the Philippines. We're proud that they are able to take home the crown, but we also can't deny that there's a lot of their lineage also has European descent. And another way that colonial mentality still manifests itself within our community is the strong hold that skin whitening products have in the Filipino beauty industry. So if you see here, here's an example of papaya soap, right? And it would have been fine if it was papaya soap, but Likas actually has products of skin whitening to brighten your skin tone. And again, that just goes on to show that the Filipino beauty industry is implying that there really is no value in indigenous features that we have, that the value and the worth is really found within Western beauty standards. And that's not true. Filipino beauty standards and Western beauty standards are different, but both hold value in different ways. So I just wanted to share you one of my most favorite art pieces. I found it in Instagram. And this is a take on another skin whitening product known as Escanol. And instead of the Escanol label on it, it says Morena, which is more of a brown tint, more brown shaded Filipinos. And it says, stay brown sis, island beauty formula, melanin poppin'. And it just goes to show that we are slowly but surely rejecting the colonial mentality, right? We're going into the generation nowadays is starting to accept their Filipino features, their indigenous features, and they're starting to see the beauty and the value our features have. So, colonial mentality and mental health, the historical trauma behind colonialism. Francis is going to go a lot more in depth with this, but I just wanted to show you how colonial mentality is already an example of historical trauma, but it also leads to other mental health issues. As seen here, colonial mentality has been shown to be related to lower levels of self-esteem, more depression symptoms, more anxiety symptoms, and overall lower levels of life satisfaction. Colonial mentality has also been linked to social anxiety, eating disorders, suicidal ideation, substance use, and risk behavior. It's also important to note that there tends to be a negative stigma within our community in reaching out for help with mental health problems because Filipino Americans are less likely than any other minority group to seek mental health care and treatment because of stigma attributed to shaming the family, self-reliance, and being reserved. So just a few numbers here. Filipinos have higher rates of depression than Asian and white Americans, and nearly half of Filipino adolescents experience suicidal ideation, compared with 13%, or specifically 13.6% of high school students. So I'm going to open up the floor. I've been talking a lot, but I would like for you guys to answer these discussion questions. Have you had any experience with colonial mentality? Where have you seen it? Have you seen it in yourself, friends, or family? Has colonial mentality affected your perspective, and how? Feel free to unmute yourself, or you could type in the chat. But yeah, I would really like to hear about your experiences as well, because it's actually really common within our community.
First of all, I love your presentation from start to beginning. And I've been thinking about this ever since we just got off of like the covert colonial mentality. I thought about how I had so many experiences being ashamed of my own lunchbox. Like I felt ashamed of bringing rice, even something as simple as like rice and eggs. I felt like I'm not one of the other kids. I'm not the kid that's gonna get like pizza. I'm not the kid that gets McDonald's. I'm not that kid that will actually have like a very popular lunchbox. Like I'll get so many questions like, what is that? What is that? And then like mind you, in my elementary school, I was like probably one of the Asian kids, one out of two of the Asian kids in the whole predominantly Latinx white classroom. So I was just like, yeah, this isn't tacos or burgers. I'm sorry, I guess. And so, like, I even had like a supervisor, like a lunch supervisor, come up to me. She's like, "Oh, hi, what is that? Back off, my lunch. You're not eating this. My lunch." So I really felt really ashamed for a long time until like high school, where I returned back to like bringing like rice again. It's
Mhm.
because like looking at school lunches, they're not that great. You get like a cardboard pizza. I don't know what everyone's like talking about. It's not that great. And so yeah, like after that and like starting to cook my own food, I grew like a larger appreciation of my identity, and that's just through food.
Thank you, Nico, for sharing. Um, if anyone else would like to write on the chat or unmute themselves about these experiences, um, I guess what I'd like to say is that all of these experiences are valid. There is a name for it. I feel like a lot of people like have a hard time identifying why they have such a huge self-hatred towards like our own culture. And I want to tell you guys that it's not your fault that like you've had instances where you wanted to assimilate and you wanted to forget about Filipino identity. It's because of external factors such as colonialization. And as you can see, like they still have a huge effect in the way we view ourselves and the way we view our culture to this day. So I'll be moving on. So we've reached the almost end part of my presentation, and that is steps to healing. What are ways we can decolonize from colonial mentality? And I want to direct your attention towards, if I could find my pointer, this statement right here. And it reads, the only way for us to dismantle this type of mentality is being able to be aware of what it is and having that desire to separate ourselves from engaging to attitudes and behaviors that encounters with our certain values. So you being here, you taking the time to listen about colonial mentality, to learn about colonial mentality and what exactly causes it, or how exactly it manifests itself, is already a huge step. So give yourself a pat on the back, because now, yeah, thanks guys. Because now you're able to identify why you have this internalized attitude, or why you had these internalized attitudes in the first place, right? And other ways we can continue to decolonize from colonial mentality is to continue to connect with your provincial or regional Filipinx heritage, right? As we've talked about, the Philippines isn't just one monolithic group. As I've talked about, um, we weren't all Filipinos until we were colonized by the Spaniards, right? There are also indigenous populations that are still present in the Philippines. So if you talk to your family members about that, you never know what you could find out about yourself. And that goes hand in hand with learning more about our history. The second that helped me personally was to make a resilience playlist. I have my own playlist on Spotify, which I will play for you guys later. And it features artists like important groundbreaking artists like Ruby Ibarra. I don't know if you guys heard of her. Yes, she's amazing. We stand her in this house. Ruby Ibarra, Classy. A lot of names are like driving by my head, but Bamboo, Bambu, are also great rappers. And they channeled their art in such an important way because they used their music as an outlet to channel, the self-hatred, the self-rejection that they felt, that could be found within colonial mentality. The second is to continue to make daily efforts to stray away from colonial mentality. And that could be anything, honestly. That I mentioned in the last few slides is allowing yourself to rest, and how that can be an example of ways to decolonize from colonial mentality, right? Um, it's okay if you weren't productive compared to like last week. Allowing yourself to rest not only honors you, not only honors your parents, not only honors your family, it honors your ancestors who were directly affected by colonial oppression. And I think that's really important. And the last one is speak up, talk to other Filipinx folks in our community. You know, I've been hearing about colonial mentality all of the time in my family circles, right? And they were always kind of like afraid or hesitant to name it or to directly call it out, but it's not calling it out, take the time to talk to your parents, whether they have, or family or Filipino friends, of their experiences with colonial mentality, because that just makes more people aware of it, and it brings more people into the conversation. So this was another quote that I found significant. It's from Bell Hooks. She's a primary, really good Black theorist, Black feminist that I look up to. And she says, one of the primary reasons we have not experienced a revolution of values is that a culture of domination necessarily promotes addiction to lying and denial. And this goes hand in hand with what I was saying. It's really important to speak up and be aware of colonial mentality, right? Because the more we don't speak up about it, the more we ignore this huge elephant in the room, it gives room for more people to deny that it exists in the first place, and it continues to create this toxic mindset in other generations to come. And another quote that I found significant from Dr. Rosales Meza again, it says, not allowing yourself to feel is a colonial trauma response. Healing comes from honoring our emotions. So again, like all of these quotes are supplementary to what I've been saying. It's another way of healing or stepping away from colonial mentality. Knowing that you're tired is a way of validating your emotions. Knowing that you're feeling burnout is a way of validating your emotions. And in doing so, it's making you step away from colonial trauma. So if you still don't know where to start, I'm happy to redirect you. The people that I mostly talked about was Ruby Ibarra. She is, let me take out my pointer again, right here. She is a groundbreaking Filipino American rapper. She has like so many great songs about her experiences with assimilating and immigrating in the US and her feelings of trying to balance her identity. And the other is E.J.R. David, which I used for academic purposes. And his book, Brown Skin, White Minds, was very, very, very groundbreaking because it goes into colonial mentality and other post-colonial psychology that continues to affect Filipino Americans today. Again, I want to open up the floor to everyone. This is the last discussion question, and it brings me to the end of my presentation. You don't have to answer, but I'd like for you guys to keep these questions in mind. What will you do to decolonize, right? What are the steps that you will take to heal from colonial mentality? If you want, feel free to unmute or type in the chat. I'm sure Nico would have a problem. Sure, yeah, you can unmute yourself. Sorry, let me mute myself.
I totally agree with what you said about speaking up. That is like the first and foremost thing that I believe that I've done to decolonize, and because, like you said, the lying and denial, or with that quote, it's like that perpetuates that cycle in our families. Whenever there's something that we think we need to hide or we can't talk about, but what I've learned is that by speaking up and speaking out to families and to other Filipinx people, like it totally just does that. It just decolonizes everything. It's cool. The power of just speaking up and talking about it. Things that we're most afraid of talking about.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and it like also validates your own experiences that you felt as well. It's always nicer to feel that like, oh, someone else has gone through this experience and now we can name it together. So thank you for sharing. Let me see if there's anything in the chat. But that's all that I have. Thank you for taking the time to listen about my findings on colonial mental health. These are the resources that I had. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your night to come and listen about what I wanted to talk about. Thank you.
No, thank you, Adelaide. Give her a round of applause. Unmute yourself, cheer for her, put it into the chat. Like, it is incredibly amazing that you presented your piece of work, your artwork today. Listen, when we said here's the project, I didn't expect like a masterful presentation. Like, if you host a class, I will for sure sign up for it and I'll stay for it and I'll go into it. And for like, I won't graduate and I'll take your class like 5 more a different other time. Anyway, we're going to go into a little break. After that break, if you would continue staying on with us, we will be talking more about trauma and how that and signs of it and how we can help ourselves and others. And but thank you so much. Give it up to Adelaide one more time, and we'll see you right after the break. Adelaide, if you can play your resilient playlist for us for the break, we'll see you all back at 7:28.
All right, guys. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so this is one of the songs that I really enjoyed. But it's by Ruby Ibarra. I really stan her. Hope you guys like it.
That comes me, turn up my headphones. The grass is greener on the other side. Forget your dreams, is you down to ride? The grass is greener on the other side. Come fuck with me, is you down to ride? The grass is greener on the other side. Follow me, they'll eat you alive. The grass is greener on the other side. Now I'm feeling lesser ground inside. It started in the Philippines, Francis and the killer bees. Till I was 13, spitting soliloquies on Dilla beats. Silly me for thinking these television imagery representing me, but most these people never look like me. Red, white, and blue is really blonde, white, and blue. I see my people wanna lighten, but enlightenment's you. Reflection of the use, deflection of the truth. Attention to the views, we neck to neck and start to lose. How can we be free and be in POC? Cause what's their POC? What's their POV? When they see no me, they see you as a DOB, or better yet a DOD. They hoping that you do all these statistics of the lottery. They play in yellow face, the other half of playing two-face. I feel they ain't used to my face up in this new place. Too dreams to chase, too much baggage like a suitcase. Feeling out of place, and we got here on a Tuesday. The grass is greener on the other side. Forget your dreams, is you down to ride? The grass is greener on the other side. Come fuck with me, is you down to ride? The grass is greener on the other side. Follow me, they'll eat you alive. The grass is greener on the other side. Now I'm feeling less brown inside. They said welcome, welcome, welcome. 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 I said